Welcome to Live with the Louhs with your hosts, Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne Louh, where we will connect our Orthodox faith to day-to-day living and relationships to our family, our work, and our view of ourselves. Father Nicholas is the priest at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church in Jacksonville, and Dr. Roxanne is a licensed clinical psychologist who uses her extensive training in private practice. Questions are welcome by calling 855-237-2346. That's 855-237-2346. Here now is Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Live with the Louhs. My name is Father Nicholas Louh, and I'm joined by my lovely wife and co-host, Dr. Roxanne Louh.
Hey, everyone.
Roxanne's a clinical psychologist, and I'm the parish priest at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church right here in Jacksonville, Florida. In fact, this is actually a ministry of our church, and we're so grateful to our community of St. John the Divine for providing us this ministry, and hopefully we can make a difference. You're joining us on this Tuesday, September 27th, and we're so excited that you're joining us. If this is your first time joining the Live with the Louhs show, it is a show that marries both faith and psychology to kind of give you some practical steps to grow in your own walk of faith every single week. We broadcast every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time from Jacksonville, Florida. And before we dive into tonight's really cool topic, I always want to encourage our friends to join us on our social media platforms. You know, friends, we're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, all under the headings of The Louhs, and our last name is kind of spelled quite uniquely. It's spelled Louhs. It's The Louhs. In fact, if you're looking for some sermons to listen to during your day or on your walk or while you're at the gym, we encourage you. All of our sermons are on our YouTube channel, so we encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Again, that's The Louhs, Louhs. And if you're one of these people like us, we love receiving daily words of encouragement, and we also send them. We have started a couple years ago sending out these daily inspirational messages, and every single morning at 7 a.m., thousands of people receive these messages. And we encourage you, if you're one of these people that are just looking for some words of encouragement that will come to your daily inbox, your email, go right now and go to thelouhs.com, click on the subscribe button that's in the very far right corner of our website. And then all you have to do is simply put in your email address, and every single morning at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, you're going to receive a word of encouragement. And if you're one of those people that are already receiving them, please do us a favor and share them with your friends and family. Encourage them to, as well to join and to receive those messages. We're just trying to lift people up in their own walk of faith. You know, tonight, as we do every single Tuesday, we encourage you to join the conversation. We believe that true growth happens not in a monologue, but actually in a dialogue. And so we encourage you to join the conversation tonight. You can call us at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. You can also email us a question during our show at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. And we're also broadcasting on our social media platform on Facebook. So if you're on Facebook and you want to listen to our show, go ahead and like us on the Louhs Facebook page. Or if you're on Ancient Faith's Facebook page, it's also being broadcast there. And if you want to leave us a question or comment, feel free to do so there as well. So let's get started. You know, friends, one of the things that we love to do is to dedicate a show to strengthening our families. You know, you've heard me say this many times on our show before, to remember this important principle, and that is that you can always tell how important something is in someone's life by the priority they place on it. Let me say that one more time. You can always tell how important something is in someone's life by the priority they place on it. This is not only true for us as individuals, but it's especially true in our own families, and it's especially true as well with Christ. Did you know that the very first thing that we see in the very first chapter of the very first book in the Bible is God prioritizing a family, Adam and Eve? And did you know that the very first thing that we see in the very first book in the New Testament is, again, God prioritizing a family, the creation of Joseph and Mary and baby Jesus? And then we see the very first miracle, God prioritizes that by having that take place at the wedding of Cana. Y'all all remember that. God values the family, and so should we. But the reality is that our marriages, friends, are really under attack. Every 13 seconds, a divorce takes place in our country. That's every 13 seconds. To make matters worse, There are many people that live in the same house, couples that live together, but they're extremely lonely. Or worse yet, their marriage is simply just a status quo marriage. It's at the same place it's been at for years and years. How do we strengthen our marriages? How do we get back to God first marriages, where our marriages are our priority? Well, today we've invited a very dear friend and therapist, Silvia Farag. Silvia Farag is a wife and mother to three incredible children. Their ages are 15, 13, and 12. Silvia holds a master's degree in social work from Fordham University with a specialization in families and children. She's a PsyD candidate, a doctorate in psychology candidate. She's also been a licensed social worker for over 14 years. She's certified as a mental health first aid national instructor, and she's a certified peace of mind facilitator through Mental Health Task Force Assembly of the Canonical Orthodox Bishops. She has an extraordinary experience in working with families in crisis and families. She specializes also in motivational therapy with couples counseling and so much more. She's a servant at St. Augustine and St. Monica Coptic Church in Warren, New Jersey, and she started the Archdiocese ministry, the Coptic Women's Fellowship, to enrich, support, and strengthen women and marriage enrichment efforts. In fact, Roxanne and I were speaking there just a couple of weeks ago. She's an experienced speaker providing instruction, education, motivation to various size groups, and she is just an extraordinary woman of faith. We're so excited, Sylvia, that you're joining us tonight on Live with the Louhs. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
So, Sylvia, let's jump right in. What do you think? Why do you think marriages are hurting so much in today's day and age?
Well, I think because today we live in a world that despises the sacrificial side of marriage and family. So think about it. The messages that we receive are to strive for power or control, maybe the upper hand in a relationship. So we're fooled into thinking that love is about doing what makes us happy. And then the second we feel less than happy, we're encouraged to bail and to stop investing. And it's easy to, right? But that's all wrong. Because marriage can be hard. We know this. Sometimes it's difficult to love someone who on a few days you may not even like very much. But there's this picture painted about the absolute power of effective communication and romance in saving marriages. And I know I shared this with you before, but in the 20 years of my marriage, all these things have been helpful tools in improving my relationship, and they should be very intentional parts of a healthy, thriving marriage, but they've never once saved us when we were in those valleys. And we all see those valleys, right? The thing I notice about couples, and we get into this as well, is that we slip into this busy life dynamic, right? So we take each other for granted. Think about that. I think people should date for the rest of their lives. Why not? Think back to when you tried to win that person to be your spouse. Look at how much effort we put in. We made sure we looked our best, how we acted. Everything about us was, I want to win this person. Then what happens? We win that person, and then within a year or 10 years or even 20, all that effort subsides, and then we stop pursuing. So we stop trying to win this person. I actually thought about this. I love the English verb earn. It's one of the only languages in the world that has the word earn. I think in Latin you say win, so you win an income. But in America, in English, you say I earn a degree, I earn an income. So you have to consistently keep at it to accomplish your goal. To pursue anything worthy, we've got to earn favor, earn respect, trust, admiration. So let's put the effort in when we were dating. It's very much kind of like, our relationship with God, right? So it's the same as going to church, right? So we could say that we're really good Christians, we're good people, but I don't have the time to go to church every week. Why can't I just pray in my car? I receive the sacraments once a month. But so what happens to our relationship with our Father when we don't earn, when we don't pursue? It's the same in any relationship, right? Would you agree?
I mean, what a great way to put it. I mean, just like going to church, it is so easy to get comfortable. And I think in today's
Yeah.
day and age, we have a pretty consumer driven culture of what can you do for me? Like
Mm-hmm.
whether it's the church or whether it's our marriage, it is
Mm-hmm.
what are you doing for me? And
Mm-hmm.
as soon as that's not filling us, we tend to sort of go, maybe the grass is greener,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes,
Well,
absolutely.
and I think too, I think that it's, I think you're saying it so beautifully, Sylvia, because I think for so often that relationship that we have with our spouse is in very much similar to the relationship that we have with Christ. And I oftentimes like to share with people that you can't be in a relationship with someone that you're not communicating with. And so often we just kind of take our marriage for granted. We worked so hard to court that person, as you were mentioning. When we're dating them, to look nice, to talk, to say the right things, to treat them with kindness, to treat them with love. And then once we've kind of finished, we've kind of like that kind of courtship ends. And the same thing is true with Christ. Sometimes whenever we need him, we're courting him. God, I'll do this and I'll make sure that I'll go to church and I'll pray and I'll spend time with you. And then once we've kind of got whatever we needed to get out of
So
that,
true.
with the courtship stops. And I think that's it's that relationship, that marriage that we have with Christ is so true in the way in which we are with our as couples. And if you're just tuning in, we're speaking with Silvia Farag. She is a therapist. We're talking about how to strengthen our marriages. We'd love to hear from you. You can call us at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. You can also email us a question during the live broadcast of our show at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com.
So, Sylvia, with this data we're seeing on divorce, talk to us a little bit about what you're noticing, that couples often misunderstand.
Sure. So when I work with a couple, I will ask them to write down things in their relationship they'd like to work on, some goals. And almost always they point the finger at each other. And without fail, majority of husbands will have this very short list of grievances instead of goals. And it will usually say something like critical, complains, withholds sex, right? And then oftentimes the wives have 5 pages, front and back, long sentences, on. And the husband just goes, see what I mean? So, but
Critical and complaining, right?
yeah, that's it. What if I told you that underneath every complaint is a longing? And if we stop and really hear that longing and respond, not react to that, then we can maybe build this connection. Because harmony really is when we take our strengths and our weaknesses and blend them together. Differences don't have to be hindrances to achieving God's purpose in our marriage. They're God's tools to teach us to trust him. So, I struggle with patience, right? But I value being punctual. So most people's weaknesses could be hidden strengths if we look at it differently. Maybe someone's indecisive because they're flexible. Kareem and I, my husband, we're different people, right? We learned that in the personality quiz that we took and just through life. He's a thinker. I'm a feeler. I throw away any of the instructions that come with the to-do, IKEA, whatever. He reads them from cover to cover and then saves it just in case. So we have personality traits that can drive each other nuts at times. But what we've
I think we may have dropped the call. What we'll do, let's take a little break, and then we'll get right back. So just stick right with us. We're just having some technical difficulties. We'll be right back. Hi, I'm Father Nicholas Louh,
And I'm Dr. Roxanne Louh.
and we're the hosts of the Tuesday evening live call-in show called Live with the Louhs.
As many of you may be aware, our program is really quite simple. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist with a private practice, and Father Nicholas is the priest at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church in Jacksonville, Florida. Together, we seek to assist our listeners with the spiritual and psychological principles that help us contend with the things of this world that separate us from Christ and that prevent us from leading healthy and productive lives.
And in this sense, friends, our show is really all about you. the listener, and we've heard from countless individuals who have benefited from it greatly, sharing with us what they've learned and how it has changed both their souls and their minds for the better.
Are you one of these people? Have you heard something on Live with the Lows that has improved your approach to faith and life? If so, you should know that this program, which is made lovingly for you, is also dependent on you for its continued existence.
That's right. Not only our show, but every program and podcast on Ancient Faith Radio is entirely listener supported. This means that without the generosity of listeners like you, there'd be no Live with the Lows. There wouldn't even be an AFR radio.
If you're not already doing so, would you please take a moment to consider right now adding your contribution to those of the other Ancient Faith radio fans who help keep shows like Live with the Lows on the air for you?
And you should know, friends, that's an easy process. Just go to ancientfaith.com and click on the donate button. It's in the upper right-hand corner. We encourage you, be a participant, be a partner, become an Ancient Faith radio donor today, friends. And we thank you in advance for your support.
We're back with Live with the Lows and Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne. Do you have a question for the Lows? Call in now at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Here once again is Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for staying with us. We had a little technical difficulties, but I think, Silvia, are you still back on?
I am here. Yes, I am.
All right,
We're going to blame
great.
it on Hurricane Ian.
Yes, exactly. We will blame it on the hurricane that's headed our way.
Yes.
But I just really want to kind of get back to that, so because I thought you were bringing up such great points about, just how we're all different, and sometimes we allow those differences to make the relationship difficult. And I loved how you were saying that sometimes those are hidden, assets, hidden strengths that we have. Maybe you could speak a little bit more on that.
Well, sure. It's easy for my husband to see where I need to change when we're not being as intentional, right? So when we make the effort to connect, we've got a greater tolerance for those differences and able to overlook them and even allow them to be very complementary to one another. I mean, Kareem's strengths are absolutely my weaknesses. So, I thank God for him and his attention to detail and his patience. He knows, but it's easy for him to see where I need to change because he knows me better than anyone else because I'm unplugged with him. And at my core, my true self is a sinner like everyone else in need of a savior. So, if we go into these marriages and our relationships and we think we've got real power over anyone, we can't change anyone for the better through coercion. You can't make someone what you want them to be, right? But there's this interesting paradox which says that any meaningful relationship, if you work on fulfilling your role to the best of your ability, if you work on bettering yourself, your relationship with Christ, putting in that relationship all that you can, the paradox is you pursue it simply because it's the right thing to do. It's got this almost mystical effect on the other. So God knows the heart of us, right? He knows the heart of man, and he knows the difference between things that are motivated out of the good and things that are motivated out of selfishness. So when you pursue being the best husband that you can be, it creates in your wife an opportunity for her to be the best that she could be, and vice versa. So isn't that the most powerful tool that we have as parents, modeling? So you see how that can work?
Absolutely. And that best version, being the best version of ourselves, does really elicit such a beautiful transformation in other people, no matter how much you strive and try and talk to and try to coerce and convince people to be different than they are. I do find that couples do miss out on, hey, when you just kind of live life as your best self, you sort of indirectly inspire these changes that you're sort of hoping for without any words at all.
But I think too, Roxanne, I think it's really great for maybe you and Silvia both to address this as therapists. I mean, when you're, probably so much of what you're seeing in your marriage counselings are couples that are really just, struggling. And what are the issues that they're struggling with deal with the differences they have. And sometimes, as we oftentimes will share, that we try to put our spouse on the potter's wheel, as the Bible speaks about this, and we try to shape and mold them into what we think they need to be, as opposed to what God wants them to be, and how much tension that happens. We also even see that in the world. I mean, we're constantly feeling like people that are different, that there must be something wrong, that we have to kind of change them. And I loved how you were saying, Sylvia, earlier, that so much we spend so much time trying to change people instead of looking at what they're great at and kind of bringing out the best in them. I mean, as Christians, I think that's what we're called to do. Is that the Bible says that we're called to gently restore them, gently lift them up, allow them to become who Christ is on the inside of them. And yet I think more often than not, we allow ourselves to finally, as the old adage goes, we just kind of nitpick at the things that are just frustrating us about them and what they don't do as opposed to what they do. Right.
Well, we end up focusing on all the negatives, right? And we know what we focus on, we empower. So I just, there's this notion of dying to self that took me a long time to truly understand this. And it was always never an easy path to follow, because it's a painful privilege. But yeah, if we can keep trying to change each other instead of really understanding what God designed for marriages, he gives us the spouses that we need for our salvation. So.
Oh, I think what you're highlighting is something that's so unique within the Orthodox Church, very different from maybe our listeners who may be coming from different Christian traditions. There is this beautiful tradition where we wear crowns during the wedding service, and there's not in an Orthodox wedding service, there's not this exchanging of vows that one is having between the husband and the wife that you often may see in the Western churches. It's actually, in many ways, it's the exchanging of the vow to Christ, that this is going to be a God-first marriage. And so maybe, Sylvia, I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on what, how do we put a God back into our marriages? How do we have a God-first marriage? And what would be some things that we could share with our listeners tonight about that?
So and I love what you said. So I'm going to tell you one of the prayers in our crowning ceremony, right? Crowns of glory and honor, yoke them in oneness of mind, crown them into one flesh. So this oneness means being one mind, operating as one. And yes, those crowns themselves are symbols of glory and honor, but they're crowns of martyrdom. So as Christ died for his church, we die to self for one another. There's no more his and hers and mine and yours. It's all ours. Oneness means ours. It's such a beautiful, illuminating way to think about it. And if we really think about what dying to self means, so, we're all wired for connection, right? But our natural tendency is towards selfishness and pride, traits that weaken our bonds and lead to isolation or distrust. But dying to self enables forgiveness. It helps us demonstrate the fruit of the Spirit and leads to a strong and thriving marriage, because God calls us to emulate him and lay aside what we think we might deserve, to offer love and mercy and grace. But my pride tells me to focus on myself, my feelings, my wants. And if that's, left unchecked, I think you can start to feel entitled and deprived and embittered. And then you say, I'm not happy. Dying to self in marriage, yes, it's painful, but it's a lot easier than you think, because do you really have to have things a certain way? Does the bed need to be made a specific way? Sure, your spouse can make different choices. He or she can act out in front of the kids in a way you don't like, but at the end of the day, God desires him or her to make right choices way more than you do. When you die to yourself, humility and submission become a lot easier, as we learn in Ephesians. As we die to ourselves, our agenda becomes, as you said, Father Nick, lifting that other person up, focusing on their needs, showing them that they're loved. And when we act this way, by the way, intimacy skyrockets. Being married is this beautiful picture of Christ, his church, and his sacrifice. St. John Chrysostom gave us this beautiful understanding. He said that through marriage, the kingdom of God becomes a living experience. I actually heard marriage called once a theophany. So whenever two people are married in the name of Christ, they become the sign which contains and expresses Christ himself. I mean, wow. So as a sacrament, marriage is a vehicle for the Holy Spirit. When a husband and wife embrace this true path of marriage, it leads to harmony. So be responsible for yourself. As Dr. Roxanne said, the best version of yourself, knowing that you're being perfected in his image. And as I say to some couples who walk through my door ready to point fingers, clean the mirror first. The rest of the house can wait.
So true. And, with that sort of responding to a longing, I think the dying to self is so helpful, when you're working on marriage, from a Christian perspective and you're thinking of that. Do you think that kind of helps people, respond better to somebody's longing, to somebody's wish, that, we're not wrong because somebody needs something done a different way. We're not wrong because somebody felt something when we did something and they interpreted it a certain way, but when we die to ourselves, we're willing to sort of be in that space of vulnerability of, hey, it's okay that somebody needs or feels something different than I would have expected, and I can die to myself in order to honor that longing or honor that wish for them. And it's almost like we do get smaller so they can become greater, which, I feel like that foundation of being willing to die to ourselves helps with that responding to the longing. Because I think what blocks it most of the time is pride, right? That,
Yes.
I'm not wrong.
Yes.
Just, you have to live with that. I'm not wrong. I didn't mean it that way. So you need to get over it. Right. But when you're sort of willing to go, it's okay, that they need something and I can shrink back to let that sort of voice be heard. I feel like that helps a little bit. I don't know. What are your thoughts about that, Silvia?
Well, what's the universal truth about the most successful couples, right? What do? They put one another's needs ahead of their own with Christ in the center. We can go further and say that as Orthodox. They put one another's needs ahead of their own, and Christ is in the center. When I'm asked to speak about Christian marriage, I have to admit that every once in a while I feel a little bit like a fraud because I fall and I fail, and I don't always put into practice what I teach. It's really hard to reconcile these ideals when you're hurt. And remember, I'm a feeler, right? So I operate on emotion. But we all fall 7 times and we get up 8. And remember that God is molding me into his image. So it means that my focus and our focus should not just be on that temporary circumstance that's in front of us, but on a greater vision that he has planned for us. Because the more we give, the better we become. That's scientific fact, right? Real love is not self-seeking. It's going to cost you some comfort, your pride.
Right.
It will cost you to lay down your life for the life of another. And, it's truly been grace that has carried my marriage and other beautiful marriages when we invited in. It's countercultural, unheard of in Hollywood, missing in many marriages, that undeserved favor towards one another that allows me to love him when I can't remember why. And it's been grace that allows him to love me when I'm really not that likable. So it took me a long time to understand this.
Right. Well, and I think too, kind of bringing this back to the, the kind of the faith part of this is that we have to recognize too that this is a spiritual battle. I mean, I think that if God makes this a priority, then obviously, and we hear this throughout Scripture, that the devil's desire is to divide and conquer in every facet, divide our own personal relationship with Christ, with the church, but also to divide families. And I remember I gave a sermon several months actually, about, one of the ways that, when we talk about dying to self, that, it's talk about a paradoxical statement, because everything that we are living in is all about, as you mentioned earlier, Silvia, beautifully, is all about the self. It's all about self-preservation, self-promotion, self-gratification. It's so much about the individual, whether it be, as you mentioned earlier, Roxanne, through our own pride, our own selfishness, and our own desires. But I think what we're sharing with in marriage is that God is not wanting you so much to be happy in your marriage. He wants you to be holy in your marriage, because the most successful marriage is not about happiness, it's about holiness. And being a Christian means that I will die so that we can live. Like I die to my own so that we as a couple can live, because I recognize that there is this spiritual battle that is taking place. And, throughout the Bible, God is warning us. He keeps telling us over and over again, be careful, wake up. As I was mentioning at that retreat, that the lion is on the prowl, referring to the devil. And, I think that for the couples that are listening tonight that may be struggling in their marriage, what we're trying to share with you is just some basic tools and principles that you can apply in your life, because sometimes the devil's in the details. It's not always the big things that mess up marriages. It's the small things that just over time just keep leaking and causing that, whether it be, not having a normal conversation, in the evening, not having dinner together, not spending quality time together, not having fun, as you were mentioning, Sylvia, earlier, not, earning each other, or, just wanting to better and look forward to speaking to that person in the evening. I mean, these are all things that are just small things, but when you start compiling them together, it looks very much like a spiritual battle that we're in. And for many marriages right now, as we mentioned at the top of the show, they're married, they're in a house full of people, but they're lonely. And so hopefully that this is encouraging all of our listeners. And we invite you, I know that some of you may not feel comfortable leaving your name on there. You can definitely call in, simply be anonymous, but we do invite you to call us and speak with Sylvia. She is a therapist who's got extraordinary experience in marriage and family. So definitely feel free to do so. You can call us at 1-855-237-2346. Friends, that's 1-855-237-2346. You can also email us a question at ask@ancientfaith.com. ask@ancientfaith.com. And want to just share one more, just a little encouragement is, if you are looking for some encouragement as well, oftentimes Roxanne and I will send daily messages that deal with marriages as well. So again, as we mentioned at the top of the show, if you're looking for a daily word of encouragement, go to our website at thelows.com, click on the subscribe button, and every single morning at 7 a.m., you'll receive a daily word of encouragement.
So Sylvia, I want to go to a question that's just come in. And the writer says, I wanted to ask a question about what to do in marriage with regards to in-laws who meddle in the marriage and create unnecessary conflict. How do you remain grounded and Christ-like in your relationship while being respectful to in-laws that don't always respect your boundaries?
Well, I would say we've got to work on better boundaries. I'm glad to hear that the goal is to remain respectful and Christ-like, because remember, one day you're going to be that mother-in-law as well, no matter what the circumstance, right? And what we said earlier, we can't change anyone. We don't have that power, but we can certainly model how we would like to be treated. And boundaries are something we as a community probably don't talk about enough, because we're so enmeshed together, right? That's our culture. I'm Coptic, and we know everything. I mean, I grew up with my mom leaving the front door open for whoever felt like coming in and having dinner. There were no boundaries. So, but you have to build this invisible hedge around your home and your family, your husband or your wife and your children and that's your little church. You have to protect that church from any outside force that will cause conflict. And I think you and your spouse have to be in agreement on how you handle this, because it's the two of you versus the problem, not each of you alone. It's the two of you as one versus the problem. I think if you have that established, you can conquer anything. As Father Nick mentioned in our retreat a couple of weeks ago, there's non-negotiable. Like, talk about it. Decide how you're going to tackle this, because our in-laws, they do what they know best with the tools that they have, right? So they don't always necessarily mean harm, but if we allow it, it will cause conflict. So I would say talk to your spouse,
Yeah, I think that's absolutely beautiful. The two of you against the problem. And that's really the goal, is to be unified and how you deal with that. I don't know about you, Sylvia, but when I see, couples struggling with this, I think sometimes that goal in mind is sort of ideally there, but where they struggle is in how they go about it, because there's so much criticism and judgment. And, people grow up in a situation that they deem as normal. So, whatever it is that you think is wrong, they tend to think is normal. And so I think it's so, oftentimes we go into these situations judging and attacking versus just sort of saying, hey, this is kind of maybe what works for us or for me, and how do we kind of get around this and create some sort of a situation that will work for us.
Well, and I think too, Roxanne, I think what you and Sylvia are both mentioning is so helpful, because I think sometimes when the relationship between the husband and wife is kind of strained, it's very easy to allow, things to become bigger than what they are. And so you can at times make big deals out of things that are not necessarily big deals. And then at other times allow yourself to kind of compromise and say, I'm just allowing this to happen without really creating those boundaries that we were sharing. And I think it's so important, I think, for our listeners to hear that your spouse is not your opponent. They are your partner. That we're in this together, and how that, and I think, Roxanne, you've said that a lot when we travel and do retreats, marriage retreats, that, what good is it if you win a battle, but you lose your friend in the process, and I think that's so important.
Yeah, and you almost want to look at it too. Like, I feel, the relationship with an in-law is your job to support your spouse's relationship with their parents, right? And so what can I do to be respectful and allowing him or her to have that relationship that they want with their parents? I mean, so I sort of look at it as I'm serving that purpose. It's not about me, right? I mean, I think that's sort of, we have to pay attention to that too, because the alignment is our husband and wife, but, we are trying to sort of help our spouse be able to have, if it becomes so much about our individual boundaries, because I don't like this about your mom and this about your dad, then, we prevent our own spouse from even being able to have relationship with their family, which is destructive to them, to their soul. Even if they agree on the outside, we're tearing them down, in many ways on the inside, because they're still a son or daughter, and they still yearn to have that relationship. I mean,
Okay, yeah. So Roxanne, for that emailer, what would we say to this person if they were? How would they, very practically speaking? And Sylvia, I'd love to get your input on this as well. Practically speaking, they sit down with their husband tonight or tomorrow. What would that conversation look like? How would you approach that, the spouse, without trying to sound like we don't want, like that you personally have a problem with the in-laws? How would you say that in a healthy way to communicate that need? Because obviously there's a need that person feels. How would you suggest that they do that? And maybe Sylvia, if you want to chime in first, and then Roxanne. But
yeah, Sylvia, go ahead.
So, I had this couple once who struggled with the same issues. She disliked lamb. It's so silly when you think about it, right? And her son absolutely loves lamb. Her husband absolutely loves lamb. So the mother-in-law, would cook lamb and nothing else every week, so her lamb-deprived son can lamb it up in happiness. And she used to take it so personally until we really just felt like the mom has this need, and your husband is enjoying it. Like, it has really literally nothing to do with you. Enjoy the salad. I don't think it's a personal attack. Like, think about it. He didn't see it. Was it worth the arguing? And she realized, I think, eventually, that really the mother-in-law and her just simply thinking that she was making this feast for her family. And she was so happy that they were coming to visit. It just takes the personal, almost expectation and desire and out of it. And think about, is it really something that needs to lead to conflict? Because we can't always, fight every little thing that upsets us. We've got to pick and choose. But, I encourage openness and talking and communicating, but, keep it to what we hear all the time. I statements, like don't go in blaming and pointing fingers and you don't support me with your mom, or you don't make me feel like I'm important, or say, sometimes I feel, and I'd love to get rid of this feeling. What do you think we can do about this?
I love that
Can you help me?
brainstorming question. Yeah. What can we, right. I love that, being on the same page and being on the same side against this. And, I like to say too, if there's not a constructive request at the end, it's probably just indulging the urge to complain, so in that situation, what would really be the request, that she can't make lamb? I mean, if we don't have something that we can brainstorm a request around, we're probably just personalizing and
that's
criticizing.
Good info. It's very good info.
We have another question that's come in, Sylvia, and I want to jump into that because it's a pretty big one that I think a lot of people have struggled with. The writer says, how do you deal with infidelity? My spouse has admitted his affair and has asked for forgiveness and to move on, to move forward. How do I know God's plan for our future?
Well, I mean, I'm sorry. That's something very difficult to go through, but it also, what Father Nick said so beautifully before, it's sometimes the little things that eat away and chip away at the fabric of our intimacy, not always the really big things, right? So, if your spouse has repented and is trying to rebuild the trust, you have to sit and ask yourself and pray, really invite God into this, because this you need to heal and you need to forgive, and you need to rebuild the trust back with your spouse. And that's not impossible. It can absolutely be done when we invite God into this. You don't have to do this by yourself. But and I encourage you not to do this alone. But I would love to hear what you both have to say about it, because it's the two of you versus the problem. I don't think infidelity will necessarily break every marriage. I think we need to really get to the core of what happened and what went wrong, because we are all sinners and we sin differently.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting with infidelity, because I think that I guess I've seen sort of two different scenarios, and one is sort of, the accidental affair where, people sort of fall into a what just happened and what did I do? An immense regret kind of follows an episode pretty immediately, and their conscience kind of like takes over, and it's a moment where flesh overrode the spirit, and they are immediately like regret, like they're punishing themselves more than you could ever punish them. And I feel there's a lot of in those particular marriages, the repair just works. I mean, it's so much easier to move forward because it's not a values differential. It's a mistake. It's a big mistake, but it's a mistake. And we all have, I think, temptations of the flesh, and they can look differently. Maybe for someone it's an affair, for someone it's, screaming in an emotionally abusive person. They're all different forms of sin that we fall prey to. So, but then there's the, what I would call not the accidental affair, the one that was not an accident. It was calculated. And I wouldn't say that there was regret. They were found out. They were caught. And that's a very different and I think shaky road with a lot of holes. And I don't always see repair happening in those situations because the values, there's a differential in the values, and it's very hard to remain in marriage when the values are not of the same mind. And so you're trying to repair something that is broken, not in the marriage, but in the person. And so, this is hard, but my feedback would be get into counseling right away. Don't rush the process. Transparency is going to be a huge part of how you move forward. But, I would say that we need to kind of probably figure out whether this was sort of the first, the accidental or the more serial offender. Because, once people offend, they're much more likely to do it again.
To reoffend. So you think that serial offender then is more about that person who got caught than the marriage itself. You think it's a symptom of that person, right?
I do.
Yeah, I agree. I do.
Yeah, and I think too, both of your comments were outstanding, and I think, although tragic, and our heart goes out to our emailer that sent that, but the thing I would also encourage is to make sure that you have your parish priest involved and engaged in this conversation. So, I would take a 3-pronged approach, one where you have preferably a Christian marriage therapist, and there are many, many of them. And I would also encourage you, though, to also engage your parish priest. In forgiveness, I think sometimes forgiveness is one of those heavy words that we try to simplify and just, in a sentence, in a 3-word sentence, like, just give it to God. Well, it is, but there's the power of the thoughts and the waking up at 3:00 in the morning and, wondering, where are they at, or, what, or replaying what could have taken place that could have led to this. And, so I think what I would encourage you is just that for this reason, I think it's so important that you do have, some therapist, someone that you can talk to, but also as a couple, for therapy as well, to kind of help you just navigate that. Forgiveness is not a moment, it's a process. It's a process in which we're constantly every day fighting the flesh of unforgiveness and realizing that we need God. As Silvia beautifully mentioned, God has got to be invited into this relationship, and God, help me to forgive, because obviously, he forgives us. The Bible says that while we were still sinning, he came and saved us. And so if God was a just God, if he was a God that would judge us based upon our sins, none of us would be able to stand before him. But it's because he's a merciful and compassionate God. So get into a marriage therapist, as well as having a parish priest involved in this. And our thoughts and our prayers are with you as well.
Please, let's normalize marriage therapy. Let's go.
Exactly.
Let's get counseling. Let's get help. You do not need to do this alone.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's definitely something that I think is much more prevalent in cultural, in more ethnic communities. And I should probably not say just ethnic communities, but I think hopefully that's changing. And I just would encourage you all, as a priest, I know most of the priests and the clergymen that I associate myself with are priests that feel the same exact way, that when you're, obviously you need to have God in that, and obviously having a parish priest, a spiritual leader in there. But, there's also when you have, your eyes are not looking clearly and you're not able to see, you go to an optometrist. You don't expect the priest to heal that. So those are things that you just, when the brain is kind of broken, we need to get some help. And so that's why it's so important to get to have a marriage therapist.
And Silvia, I want to go to another writer who's just written in. We're getting a flood of questions here. The writer says, lately my husband and I have been fighting and disagreeing a lot. He feels I'm constantly complaining about him, but I feel that I'm merely sharing my emotions in a respectful way. It hurts when he doesn't validate my feelings. And though I'm not perfect, if I'd find myself disappointing him or upsetting him, I apologize immediately, if not 30 minutes later, and I feel I don't get the same respect, and it hurts.
So, again, is your husband more of a thinker? So sometimes, when I think Kareem is checking out and not validating my feelings or what I'm thinking or what I'm, experiencing, he's really checking in. He's taking inventory and notes and his mind, he's processing. He processes differently than mine. That way he can answer me later and respond with some kindness. But if he responds to me right away, it's not necessarily going to go well. And that could lead to conflict. So I'm hot. I'm emotional. I'm I'm flooded with emotions and I'm upset about something. So it took me a long time to recognize he's not necessarily checking out. He's checking in, and I have to respect that process. So I can't confront to connect with him. It doesn't work. I used to try because I never wanted to sleep, upset or angry, but that's just not the way his mind is wired. So I wonder, is your timing correct? Can you check in with him and ask for the right time to speak? Or is the conversation safe for him? Does he feel like he is being attacked? There's a beautiful way to talk with one another, and that involves, keeping it about yourself and the two of you again versus the problem, not you are, you always, you never, which we all tend to do when we're upset. So that might be just way too much for him, and he checks out.
That's right. That's right. And, never hurts to ask, hey, what do you hear me saying to you? Right. Like, sometimes that's the most insightful moment when you're like, whoa, that's not at all what I was trying to say. I'm so sorry that's how you heard it. Let's try again. Yes. Sylvia, we have another question that just came in, and it is about infidelity, probably going a notch deeper here. And the writer says, I want to ask about overcoming the damage from infidelity. How can the guilty party really show their sincerity in being sorry and their desire to work toward reconciliation? And the second piece is, how can the injured party work through the pain of betrayal?
Well, I think it's like what Father Nick said, it's a three-prong approach. You need professional guidance, spiritual guidance. I would urge each of you to also get individual therapy, sit individually with your fathers of confession, because it's not like was mentioned before. It's not just a moment and then it goes away. It really is a process, and we've got to step into this uncomfortable, painful process to get to the other side of this almost dysfunction. And we can't get to that other side unless we walk through that area, that time of dysfunction. But you've got to work on this intentionally, both of you together and individually, I would say. And the guilty party, if they're showing guilt and remorse and the desire to fix and connect and repair, we don't, as tempting as it is to keep punishing that person, I think to accept those bids of connection, it doesn't necessarily mean what they did was right or all is forgiven, but to accept those bids for connection can also help us in our healing, right? I often tell couples when they are hurting to pray for one another, especially, and can't stand each other. Sit down and say a prayer for your spouse. Can you hear me?
Yeah. To not be so afraid of that vulnerability too.
Hello.
Of sincerely trying to figure out, hey, what was this? What happened within me? I mean, I think the guilty party, when I see that journey of them really going, not for my spouse, but I want to know what happened. What was that for me? And that sincere desire to connect with whatever it was that overcame them, to figure that piece out, I always feel like is a really great sort of trusting piece moving forward, that this marriage is going to have a lot of hope, because there's that desire to uncover and repair and heal something pretty big that overtook them, irregardless of their spouse. That's my soul, right? And so when you see that, you see light, for the marriage.
Right. And I think, just to kind of, I think maybe, Roxanne, this is something that is really, I think our listeners are really telling us that maybe for us dedicating a show to infidelity would be something that we should probably do soon.
Great idea.
But I do think
that's a great idea.
Yeah, I think that for the emailer, what I would encourage them as well is, so often when we have these kind of, and I say this in a very respectful way, but when we have these 9/11 moments where our earth is just shattered and everything that we feel that the earth underneath our feet is just moving so quickly, it's easy to do what in psychology we call either fight or flight. We can want to just fight, and where we're pouncing and we're judging and we're the judge and we're the jury and you're condemned, or we do the let's go run away, let's just go avoid things, and sometimes it may even be both. But I just would encourage you is to make sure that don't always think of things in absolute terms, because sometimes when our minds try to grab that, because the mind really isn't able to grab fully or grasp fully all that's kind of going on, so often it can kind of just think of things in absolute terms, like I'll never be able to trust him again. This relationship will never be where it was, or vice versa. That he's never going to be repentant, or is he really being repentant? It's just these constant, barrage of questions that oftentimes deal with these answers that you really can't get. And I just want to encourage them to also be careful that those can also be a spiritual battle that you can be personally going through, so that while you're down, it's like the enemy is kicking you while you're down. So be cautious about that. That's why it's so important that we recognize that forgiveness is a journey. It is not a moment. I am journeying through this forgiveness and having help, creating a village to help me. Just like we had at 9/11, we had a whole team of people. We had our country coming together. Right. We had our leaders coming together. We had our neighbors came together. In the same way, we're creating a team that's going to help you and your spouse, that team, kind of get through that. And so just try not to allow yourself to kind of go to the absolutes, because there's no absolute other than Christ is the way, he's the truth, and he's our life. That's the only thing that's absolute. Everything else is within, allow the process, the journey to take place. We've only got like a minute and a half left. And I know that, Silvia, we're definitely going to have you on our show again, but I do want to have just, if you had in the last, 120 seconds of our show, just maybe share with us, you've been a therapist for over 20 years. You've been married for over 20 years as well. What are some just real quick nuggets of wisdom that you'd love to share with our listeners?
Well, I feel free to add to this, but what I learned sometimes beautifully by the grace of God, and just sometimes the hard way is, number one, first and foremost, pray together and for each other. That keeps God right in the center, driving this vehicle of your life. Pray together. And never stop dating your spouse. I mean, you've been married 20 years, believe me, we're tired. But put in the effort, please. I see this too much, but always have each other's back in public. Just never belittle your spouse. Disagreements are in the privacy of your home. And those disagreements probably occur when being right is actually more important than listening. I know everybody says don't let the sun rise on your anger, but let's be real, that no one argues well after midnight, at least me and my age. So sometimes it's okay to go to bed upset, like consider it a timeout and let's revisit it tomorrow. That's it. And laugh together. I know for me and for a lot of folks, humor can de-escalate anything. And it's got this magic quality of making you forget what you're upset about in the first place. It's really not that serious sometimes. Tenderness is not weakness, it's strength. And marriage is not romance, it's faithfulness. And please feel free to add.
I love that. I think that is such valuable wisdom. And Silvia, we're definitely going to have you on the show again, and our time has just run out so quickly.
So quick.
But we thank you so much for thank you so much for joining us tonight. We were so blessed to have you, and please give our love to Kareem and to the family, and just know how much we appreciate all that you do for the Coptic Church and really just for the Orthodox Church as a whole. And look forward to having you on the show again.
Thank you so much. God bless.
Thanks, you. Silvia. We also want to thank Matushka Trudy for producing our show this evening. We're so blessed to have her and all the great people at Ancient Faith. Thank you again for taking the time to join us tonight. And again, if you're interested in receiving our daily inspirational messages, go to thelows.com, click on the subscribe button, and every day you'll get just a daily word of encouragement. Next week, we have our special guest, Father Jeremy Davis, on his brand new book, Welcoming Gifts, Sacrifice in the Bible and in Our Christian Life. You don't want to miss that show. So God willing, everyone, we'll see you all here next Tuesday. God bless you and stay strong in your walk of faith.
Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne are the authors of the book